There's Raza here.
But also,
We got our signs up?
you're here.
Who witnessed this? We
Okay.
have to watch CNN or anything?
Well, let's go ahead and get started. We have a number of colleagues coming today, and I'm pleased to say that there is a lot of interest in this issue because it's so important right now. We already have a crisis at the border. Everybody knows that. That crisis threatens to become a catastrophe. So last year, about 1 million people came into our country, mostly under the asylum system. So they came to the border unlawfully, allowed to come into the country. This year, we are on track to have a lot more. We don't have the final numbers yet, but probably it'll be between 1.5 and 2 million people. So it's already at crisis levels. And when you talk to the Border Patrol, they will tell you it's very difficult for them to deal with the current flow. We also know that along with people coming over our border in unprecedented numbers, we have an unprecedented amount of illegal drugs coming into the country, particularly the synthetic opioid called fentanyl. Those numbers are at historic levels and unfortunately are resulting in overdoses and overdose deaths in this country at historic levels. So in my home state of Ohio, as an example, we have a increasingly large number of people who are overdosing and dying from fentanyl. I was at a drug coalition meeting a few days ago in Ohio, and I asked whether the national statistics, which say that 2/3 of the people who overdose and die are dying from fentanyl, is accurate, and at least in the Toledo, Ohio area, they told me no, it's more like 80 or 90%. This fentanyl is coming in primarily from the southern border. So it's an immigration issue, it's a humanitarian issue, it's a safety issue, and it's certainly an issue of illegal drugs with a devastating impact on our communities. We're here to talk about the possibility of it getting even worse, which is because the public health authority called Title 42 may well expire. The administration, as you know, has supported having it expire next month. The Border Patrol, again, have said in no uncertain terms to all of us, and I hope to many of you, that should that happen, they will lose operational control of the border. Right now, there are about 8,000 people a day coming through the border. They believe that if Title 42 is revoked, that number will increase dramatically. The Department of Homeland Security has told us privately that they think that's between 12,000 and 18,000 people a day. So this is just impossible for the Border Patrol to handle. The Title 42 issue, to set the stage here for my colleagues and their remarks, is in litigation. There's a judge in Louisiana who has said that the administration cannot simply revoke this, but they have not set a date as to what might be the appropriate time frame, if there is one. So there's a lot of uncertainty right now, certainly. But we have to presume that the administration may be successful here, and that means Title 42 would come to an end. Roughly half of the people who come to the border are turned away under Title 42. Roughly half. So the 1 million people a year is really 2 million people a year. About 1 million are turned back under Title 42. We also know that the Public Health Emergency and the National Emergencies Act are continuing in place indefinitely. So there seems to be a real disconnect between what's happening with regard to Title 42 on the one hand and the public health emergencies on the other hand. This is a situation that, again, is already a crisis, already something that we cannot handle with current resources. Yesterday, we had a conference call with the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, Alejandro Mayorkas, in which he laid out a potential plan should Title 42 be revoked. It sounds a lot like the plan currently in place, which is simply to expedite people coming through the process. No plan to put in place the kinds of things that were in place during the Trump administration to try to deal with the border crisis, including the Remain in Mexico policy, the expedited removals, the notion that with regard to asylum there would be more scrutiny earlier in the process, but instead just coming up with a way to provide more resources to move people through the system more quickly. So in effect to make it easier for people to get from the border into the interior of the country. So that was disappointing. I'm really glad, again, my colleagues are all here, and a lot of them have been down to the border, as I have, and heard directly from the Border Patrol and Customs and Border Protection folks at the ports of entry to understand the severity of this crisis. I'd like for you to hear from them now. Senator Barrasso.
Well, we actually have a dangerous crisis of national security going on in the border, and it's going to get a lot worse under Joe Biden. From day number one, Joe Biden started rolling out the red carpet to illegal immigrants by signing so many executive orders specifically making it easier for illegal immigrants to come to the United States. The number of people that came into the United States illegally in the first 14 months of Joe Biden was more than came in under 4 years of President Trump. And we're talking about 2 million crossings last year. And if Title 42 goes along, we're talking about over 500,000 expected next month alone. And if the numbers alone aren't distressing enough, it's taking a look at who some of these people are in terms of criminals, drug dealers, gang members. And if you're on the terrorist watch list, this is a dream come true for you if you're trying to get into the United States illegally. Now, we have a number of Democrats who are now running away from the president. These are Democrats who are running for re-election, and they're running scared because they know the president's policies on immigration are so very unpopular. But President Biden has turned over the border and his policies on immigration to people who really don't believe there should even be a border. I mean, even the Vice President of the United States, when she was running for president, said she wanted to eliminate Immigration and Customs enforcement. We know what we need to do to secure the border. Enforce the law. Finish the wall. Reestablish the Remain in Mexico policy. It works. Title 42 is about public health and public safety. And the president is talking out of both sides of his mouth on this. Because in one regard, he's saying he asked for $25 billion additional dollars for COVID, because COVID is such a crisis in the United States right now. And at the same time, on the other side of his mouth, he said, oh, COVID is done. We don't have to worry about it with regard to the border. We can make it a lot easier for illegal immigrants to come to this country. When we talked yesterday, a number of us in leadership on the conference call with the Secretary of Homeland Security, the plan he laid out was to allow illegal immigrants to come here faster and easier, not to keep them out. So for people who believe like I do, we have a dramatic and desperate crisis of national security at our southern border. I will tell you, if they eliminate Title 42, it's going to get a lot worse.
Thanks.
Well, thanks, Rob. We are a nation of laws. We're a nation of immigrants. But the one thing that we have to have in this country is respect for our laws. And this is the Biden border crisis. No ifs, ands, and buts about it. There has never been a more direct correlation between a set of policy decisions and consequences resulting from those decisions than what we've seen at the border. When they came to office, they got rid of they took 94 executive actions that got rid of the tools that enable our Border Patrol to keep the border secure. And what have we seen? 2 million illegal crossings last year, 221,000 last month, the highest number in 22 years. And we're told that if Title 42 goes away, we're looking at 18,000 a day compared to 1,600 per day pre-pandemic. These are staggering numbers. And we're also told that by the Border Patrol that 9 out of 10 agents will be taken off the border and used to process migrants. Well, what does that do to all the other unsavory things that are happening at the border? Senator Portman mentioned a number of those, but the biggest killer today of people between the ages of 18 and 45 is fentanyl. And fentanyl is coming across the border because it's just essentially an open border. And so we've got the direct consequence of these Biden administration policies playing out in front of the American people on a daily basis. And what have they done? Well, they stopped construction of the border wall, as Senator Barrasso pointed out. They have significantly curbed deportations. They have ended the Remain in Mexico policy. These are all policy decisions taken by executive action by an administration which is yet to visit the border. So the president and his border czar, the vice president, are directly responsible for what is happening at our southern border. And Title 42 makes it much, much worse. If they end that, if they repeal Title 42 as they are intending to do, it is going to intensify and make much worse a problem that is already of epic proportions in terms of the disaster that we're seeing there on a daily basis. So the Democrats in the Senate at least are coming to the realization, I think in the House as well, that this is a really bad idea. And they're conveying that, I think, to the administration. Hopefully the administration will listen, because if they move forward with this policy, it will be on top of a whole bunch of other bad policies that have contributed to a major crisis at our southern border. And Republicans in the Senate are going to insist on a vote. We want to vote. We want to put people on the record whether or not they support this really awful decision by this administration to backtrack yet again on a border policy that has at least had some success in controlling and keeping the number of illegal crossings somewhat under control. But it will explode. It will flat explode if they move forward. So we're going to do everything we can to stop that, and Republicans in the Senate are going to insist upon a vote on Title 42, and I hope, sincerely hope, that we'll have a lot of Democrats who will join us.
This is policy insanity. The Biden administration is getting the immigration policy that they designed. They stripped away all the restrictions for actually people crossing the border. They get this result. Now, with record high numbers of people illegally crossing the border, now they're saying, and we're going to drop Title 42 as well. So we get record high numbers now of illegal crossings, and they're going to say we're going to strip away the last piece that we hadn't taken away before to increase this number even higher. May I remind everyone that's here of the simple fact: the 221,000 encounters, as they called them, from the last month is a record high number. What people are not talking about as well are the 66,000 what they call gotaways that also happened last month. That is, the Border Patrol were so active trying to round up and engage this group of 221,000, they could see in the distance and count people crossing the border. There were 66,000 that we had no contact with, that we literally watched them come across the border. Who's crossing the border and what's happening at this point? Well, it's people from 157 different countries just in the last 6 months that have crossed the border. None of these individuals have a criminal background check actually carried out on them from their home country. They're doing a criminal background check if they've committed a crime in the United States before, but we have no idea in the country they're coming from if there's a criminal background at all. And for the 66,000 gotaways that happened just last month, we have no criminal background check in this country or in their previous country. This is opening up our nation to additional crime. While the American people are literally saying, let's deal with the crime problem, the Biden administration is opening up the border more and having even more people cross the border with no check, with no evaluation of their previous history at all. This is why I say it is policy insanity what they're doing. The plan that we were given yesterday, this plan statement that came in from Alejandro Mayorkas, this plan that was supposed to define out for us is not a plan at all. It's basically how they're going to move people into the country faster. It notes things like currently they're releasing people into the country and giving them 8 years before there's a hearing. They're going to now just catch and release people the same at a faster pace, moving them into the country and say, now you've got to check in within a year. But there is no evaluation. There's no chase on those individuals if they don't check in. So whether it's an 8-year time period, whether it is now, or whether they magically move that to a 1-year time period, there's no change. Fascinatingly enough, in this report, they say they're lifting Title 42 authority at the border because there's no COVID at the border, but they can't detain individuals because there's COVID in their detention facilities. So there's no COVID when you're crossing the border, but if you actually hold people in detention, then there's mass COVID, so we can't actually hold people in detention. So they don't increase bed space at all in this process. That's a major problem. And can I tell you, if you read through the report, and I hope you do, from what they call a supposed plan. This is not a plan. This is just what they plan to be able to carry out to increase the numbers even more. It's not a plan to decrease the numbers. And I can say that not based on my opinion, but based on theirs. Go to the back of their report of their supposed plan on this. They end with their conclusion statement. May I read this to you? The conclusion statement says, despite the best efforts of our dedicated DHS workforce and our partners executing this comprehensive plan, a significant increase in migrant encounters will substantially strain our system even further. So their plan is not to reduce the number of people crossing. Their plan is this is about to get worse, and we're aware that this is about to get worse. This is not a plan to stop illegal immigration. This is a plan to accelerate illegal immigration, and they even admit it. This has got to stop. The American people just want the enforcement of our laws. That is not too much to ask.
Well, thank you all for being here, and thank you, Rob, for spearheading this. Well, we've been here before. We've been talking about this is at least the second or third press conference that I've been a party of to talk in a cautionary tale as to what we see over the horizon. And the administration, by their own admission by numbers, as James said, they are acknowledging that it will occur. So here we go again. Here we go again. But there's a couple differences. Significantly, as Senator Portman mentioned, our colleagues on the other side of the aisle, in growing numbers, are imploring the president to postpone, to relook, and to rethink the decision to get rid of Title 42 in May. And so we see those numbers, I think, as we get closer to the date, we know these numbers are going to go up. But we also have our friends in the media that would not normally be rising to put on their opinion pages things that we agree with, maybe. Here we got the Washington Post. A migrant surge is coming at the border, and Biden is not ready. That was in April of this year. And then we have NPR that says, what happens at the border once it is lifted, Title 42? In a word, influx. That's a mild word, I think, compared to what we think will happen and know will happen. It's going to be a catastrophe. And Senator Langford, Senator Portman, and Senator Thune, we were on this call yesterday with the Secretary Mayorkas. And when we talked afterwards, you know, 6-point plan, as James was pointing out, it's only a way to manage the more and more numbers that are coming, and it isn't really managing. It's transportation, it's healthcare. It's moving people from actually the border into more central parts and then processing them there. What's that going to do? That's going to keep you all away from the processing centers of where all of this is really occurring. In my view, that's ducking the media, in my view, and ducking what the real numbers could and will be. So I'm the ranking member on the Appropriations Committee for Homeland Security. We've been very generous with Homeland Security. We've provided them already with a supplemental to help them deal with the surge. But this surge was here. When we see what's going to be the influx or catastrophe, as I would categorize it, that is another press on the appropriations and on the resources that we're going to be willing to look at and give to the Department of Homeland Security. So I think, and I specifically asked the Secretary that question, are you looking for another supplemental? And he very artfully answered sort of a maybe, I think would be a good way to characterize the way he answered that, very discouragingly. So I join with my colleagues, with my Democrat colleagues, with those in the media, with my folks at home are very concerned about this. Why would somebody in West Virginia be worried about this? Because we have the highest percentage of deaths from overdose per capita than any other state in the union. Fentanyl is killing our friends and neighbors, and it's all coming through the southern border. So the diversion of agents, and they're losing agents because the morale is terrible. Why would you want to be protecting our southern borders and be prideful of what you're doing in law enforcement every day when your president is just letting you get overrun? You can't disrupt the drug trade because you're so busy processing and doing all of the things that happens when 18,000 people come across the border every single day. So there's time, Mr. President, to rethink this. There's time for us to find a better way, and the plan needs to be deterrence, whether it's expedited removals, quick asylum adjudication to get that, the Remain in Mexico policy. We have some solutions here that worked under the Trump administration to keep these numbers down. It's time now to look seriously at these before this catastrophe descends upon us. Thank you. Yeah.
Senator Cruz.
Thank you, Rob. Right now, we've got a crisis at our southern border. It is chaos. It is endangering the safety and security of Americans. We are seeing hundreds of thousands of children being brought in by human traffickers, many of them subject to violent abuse, to sexual abuse. We're seeing criminals, violent criminals. We're seeing gang members. We're seeing people who are known terrorists coming in illegally. This chaos is the result of political decisions made by Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. And looking at the chaos at the southern border, only this administration would decide it's not bad enough that we have the highest rate of illegal immigration in 61 years, 2 million people last year. It's not bad enough. They want to make it worse by rescinding the use of Title 42 to protect against COVID-19 infections. It's interesting that on April 1st, the CDC issued a statement urging the end of Title 42, saying, quote, "After considering current public health conditions and an increased availability of tools to fight COVID-19, such as highly effective vaccines and therapeutics, the CDC director has determined that an order suspending the right to introduce migrants into the United States is no longer necessary." 12 days later, on April 13th, the same CDC extended the order that everyone must wear masks on airplanes. So here's the Biden administration's reasoning. It's just fine, according to the CDC, for tens of thousands of illegal aliens to be released who may well have COVID-19, to surge into Texas communities where the hospitals are overrun, they are full, where the schools are full, where the jails are full. But American citizens, even those who have been vaccinated, even those who have had COVID, they must wear a mask. It is utterly arbitrary and hypocritical. Now, thankfully, both of those decisions, the decision to end the use of Title 42 and the arbitrary decision to require everyone to wear masks on planes, both of them, the federal courts have stopped. But the partisan hypocrisy is stunning. This is the CDC embracing open borders. And I will say partisan hypocrisy, Capitol Hill is certainly not immune from that particular failing. We're now seeing a bunch of Democrats, interestingly enough, all collected in states where they're on the ballot in November. And they've suddenly discovered the American people don't like it when you have 2 million illegal immigrants, when you're releasing vast numbers of people in chaos. And so suddenly you got Democrats who are releasing statements saying we should not end Title 42. The hypocrisy of that is last year I forced a vote on my amendment to codify the protections of Title 42, to stop the administration from ending Title 42, and every single Democrat voted no. Every one of the Democrats who's putting out press statements. So the press statements are actually very convenient because the corporate media will happily parrot that they oppose ending Title 42, while ignoring the fact that when they had a chance to actually do something about it, every single Democrat voted no. And by the way, many of us have been fighting to get another vote on Title 42, and Chuck Schumer is blocking the vote because he doesn't want to vote to put people on record. This is extreme, it's radical, it's dangerous, and it's unnecessary. The open border policies of this administration are a disaster. And I'll tell you, my prediction is in November, South Texas is turning bright red. South Texas has been a heavily Democrat region of our state for 100+ years. This November, I think we're going to elect Republican members of Congress. I think we've got a good shot at electing 2 or even 3 Hispanic women Republicans to represent South Texas, because I can tell you, when I sit down at roundtables in South Texas, elected Democrats tell me, if my party is the party of open borders, I can't support that. This is a disaster, and it is caused by Joe Biden and Kamala Harris.
Well, this administration is either incompetent or they want this crisis. It has to be one or the other. Either they're incompetent or they want this crisis. I think we all realize that if we repeal Title 42, if we implement DHS's plan, we're going to double or triple the number of people coming across the border in the next few months. We've done over 90 town halls in Kansas now since being sworn in a little bit over a year ago. And I can assure everybody that their biggest concerns are inflation and the safety and security of their families. And their safety starts at this open southern border. I want to bring this issue home to Kansas. We're not a border state, in case you didn't have geography. We're in the heartland, the very middle of the country. And this is the front page of the Kansas City Star this Sunday. The front page of the Kansas City Star this Sunday, 2 young men in the prime of their life, high school age boys that died from overdose of fentanyl. We all should realize that a teaspoon of fentanyl could kill 1,000 or 2,000 people. These young men, I don't know if they took half a tablet, if they took 1 tablet, but that would be plenty to make most people stop breathing. In the past 3 months, Kansas has had 2,500 drug overdoses. Last month, Wichita police officers on a routine traffic stop picked up somebody with 7,000 fentanyl pills. And again, each one of those pills could probably kill several people. We've apprehended, since Joe Biden was sworn in, over 6 tons of fentanyl seized at the border. I drive a Dodge Ram truck. I could back my truck up and fill that 10 or 12 times, and that's how much we've seized. And we could assume that multiples of that have got across the border. I think the only conclusion is, like I said, that this administration is either incompetent or they want this crisis. Thank you.
I think one of my Democratic colleagues had it right. The other day they said the administration's efforts to roll back Title 42, quote, shows a lack of understanding about the crisis at our border, unquote. Now, the White House says this issue's about public health concerns, about the pandemic, but the Biden administration only seems to be concerned about the pandemic when it supports their liberal agenda. Now, according to the administration, the pandemic continues on airplanes, where they continue to fight for a mask mandate. The pandemic continues in the halls of Congress, where the administration continues to lobby for billions of dollars in emergency relief funds. But on the border, they say the pandemic's over. Come on. Immigration officials have warned that letting Title 42 expire will make our border crisis 3 times worse. 3 times worse after a year where we had 2 million illegal border crossings. We know what needs to be done. The administration needs to stop playing games. They need to do what's right for the country. They need to enforce the law, and they need to do what a bipartisan majority of United States senators is now calling for. Keep Title 42 in place and secure the border.
So last week I was in Del Rio. I was in Eagle Pass, and went down to see our North Dakota Guardsmen. We have 125 Guardsmen down there, also in Uvalde. And they're the eyes and ears of the Border Patrol. So I was down there to support them and, again, call attention to crisis that is going on at the border. Now, it's interesting. Last year I was down there with Cornyn and Cruz. We had 16 senators, and we were just to the east in the Rio Grande sector. Del Rio sector is immediately to the west. The Rio Grande sector has been the busiest sector. Now remember, 220,000 illegal encounters by Border Patrol just in the last month, in March. Okay, 1.7 million last year, and that doesn't even count the gotaways. Okay, and what's going on is, at the time we were there, the Rio Grande sector was the busiest. Now that's becoming the Del Rio sector because they're migrating over there because they have many fewer Border Patrol officers in the Del Rio sector. So they move where there's the least resistance. Senator Portman, myself, we were in Mexico last year. We were in Central America. We were in South America. It's a demand pull situation because in Mexico and Central America and South America, they know if they come, they're getting in. So they're coming. And interestingly, last year when we were in the Rio Grande sector, they said people were coming from 50 different countries. 50 different countries last year. This year, just last week when I was in Del Rio, they said 100 different countries. So Customs and Border Protection gave us a briefing, and they said that's gone from 50 different countries, people illegally crossing the southern border, now from 100 different countries. Think about that. Yeah, the numbers are staggering. And remember, when you get those numbers from Homeland Security, and they talk about 220,000 encounters with people crossing the border illegally in the month of March, that doesn't count the gotaways, which can be maybe 40% more. And those are the folks that don't want to be encountered. Why? Because they have criminal records, they have drugs, they're human trafficking. That's what's going on. And if the administration lifts Public Order 42, it just gets worse. It just gets worse. When I was down there, we had two guardsmen from the North Dakota National Guard, Specialist Alvarado, Specialist Clem, who had just saved 5 migrants who were trying to cross at Del Rio. They were out there, and the river's high, the current is strong. There were 5 migrants that probably would have drowned. They went out and they got them, and they saved them at great risk to themselves. And we know what that risk is because we saw what happened to a Texas National Guardsman here just this week. He drowned out there trying to save migrants crossing illegally who were trafficking drugs. That's a tragedy. That's a tragedy. Why is this administration not stopping that? Why is this administration not stopping that? And we know it can be done. The last administration, the Trump administration, did it. You enforce you keep Public Health Order 42 in place. You enforce the Third Safe Country Protocol and the Remain in Mexico Protocol, and you build the border wall. And we can secure that border. Congress needs to push for it. The courts need to push for it, and the public needs to push for it. We need to get the Biden administration to enforce the law and secure the border.
I think there's a consensus among anyone with any common sense that if we lift Title 42, it's going to create a true crisis on the southern border. That's what we've been speaking of. It's going to create tremendous havoc. John mentioned the men and women that work so hard on the border, do a tremendous job. You can imagine the strain that they're under now, but it's going to be unimaginable what they're going to be facing. The other thing is it's going to put tremendous pressure throughout all of our government agencies. I'm blessed. I'm a senior member on the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee. I'm also the ranking member on military construction and veterans appropriations. I've been through countless hearings, countless visits with VA leadership regarding the lack of resources that we have right now due to the labor shortages, needing specialists, needing all kinds of different providers. The list goes on and on. One of the things I'm very concerned about, there's talk of using the fourth mission. This is the idea that when you have a crisis, that the Veterans Administration then can step in and provide resources to help fill that void. This is going to be a crisis, but it's a Biden administration manufactured crisis. Americans, veterans have given everything for this country. We can't let the resources and personnel that are supposed to be dedicated to taking care of them get ripped away because the President and his administration have so badly mismanaged our border security and illegal immigration problem. They don't deserve it, and we won't stand for it. Thank you.
I think it's pretty clear that everyone that has spoken today just wants President Biden to do his job and to protect Americans. You know, this administration is continuing to just wreak havoc on the southern border. You know, it tells Americans that Title 42 is no longer necessary because COVID's behind us. And in the same breath, they're asking for billions of dollars in more COVID relief. How hypocritical is that? You know, it is amazing that the Biden administration is ending the COVID emergency for illegal immigrants, but is filing appeal on a federal judge's order to overturn the mask mandates on airplanes, trains, and buses. Eliminating Title 42, the consequences that we know that will bring, that, 1 million more people would cross the border in the first 6 weeks after Title 42 is eliminated, that's what we're looking at. It will make this issue that is already an unbelievable crisis, it will make it 3 times as bad as it is now. It is unreal that you've got an administration that is actually implementing this and defending it. You know, Shelley said, why is West Virginia so concerned? Let me tell you why Mississippi is so concerned. Interstate 10 and Interstate 20 run right through Mississippi. This past week, a driver was pulled over, and, you know, these law enforcement agents have such a hard time, but a driver was pulled over and arrested, a Texas man, for transporting over 3 pounds of these fentanyl pills that we're talking about. 3 pounds of this little pill. And it was right there in Rankin County in Mississippi. It's destroying lives. It's destroying families. Our job is to protect Americans. Our job is to enforce American laws. So, when it comes down to the Biden administration just simply using COVID as an excuse to push through these liberal policies, and it just doesn't matter what it's doing to the safety of Americans. It is unbelievable. We need to continue to have these press conferences. We know what's in front of us. Again, we're just asking President Biden to do his job, to protect Americans, and enforce the laws that have already been passed.
Cindy, thank you. Questions, comments? Yes.
Senator Portman, some of your Democratic colleagues aren't necessarily opposed to lifting Title 42, rather lifting it without a plan. Now that there has been a plan released by Secretary Mayorkas yesterday, are you worried that some of your colleagues across the aisle are going to switch over their sides? Have you had any conversations with them? What are you hearing?
Oh, it's a great question. I have not heard that, but I wouldn't be surprised. The problem is it's not really a plan. And, we looked at it carefully yesterday. We had a briefing on it. And primarily what it does is it expedites the immigration process. As an example, instead of having processing at the border, there would be processing on the bus or other means of transportation going further into the interior to take pressure off the border. As an example, there would be more people hired to process people more quickly, but nothing with regard to slowing the flow. So it's not a plan that deals with this crisis, which is getting, of course, far worse if Title 42 is removed, in that about 50% of the people were turned away. So this line would have been up here if 42 had not been in place. And so I mean, that's a decision I guess my colleagues are going to have to make on the other side of the aisle. I think 11 members have said they have some concerns with revoking Title 42 at this point. The other point I would make is this is not about Title 42. Ultimately, that's going to go away. At some point, COVID will be behind us. We won't have a public health emergency. We'll be left with a policy that doesn't work. And we know what works because here, as you can see, we had effective control of the border. by putting in place some sensible policies. The asylum policy changes that Senator Capito and others talked about is one thing we have to do that actually was not done during the last administration that would even lower those numbers further, which is to say immediate adjudication. If somebody doesn't qualify, they'd be sent home. And that 85% of the people who are applying from Mexico or Central America or other places are, in the end, not being granted asylum. And yet, they're in the United States for 6 to 8 years and embedded in the communities and so on. So we know it works. And that's the kind of policy we're looking for. Yep.
My question is for Senator Cruz. You mentioned that Leader Schumer was blocking a vote on having the Senate go on record with whether they support delaying or keeping Title 42 in place. What's the best legislative avenue at this point to keep it in place? I know that there's also bipartisan legislation from Senator Langford and Senator Sinema at this point.
Look, I would be happy with any vehicle that is moving. There was a couple of weeks ago before the recess, we were initially going to vote on their supplemental funding for so-called COVID relief, and many of us were conditioning that vote on voting on Title 42, and Schumer ultimately pulled it down. He supports the bill he wants to pass, but not at the price of actually having a vote on Title 42. And my point is, if you know, Democrats could have come to this press conference. There are no Democrat senators standing here. So I get that the ones up for re-election are putting out press statements claiming that they don't want to end it. But when they voted on it, every single one, 100% of them, voted against preserving Title 42.
Do Republicans concede that this is no longer really about public health? Because Republicans have been very vocal about rescinding all other pandemic-related restrictions. But Title 42 was ostensibly put forward as a public health measure. So if you don't support mask mandates, right, and a host of others, then how do you justify continuing to support Title 42?
Look, mask mandates are the height of hypocrisy. And by the way, I will say on mask mandates, if you look on any airplane, people are voting with their faces. Vast majority of people on planes, the instant the mandate was repealed, pulled them off. I got to say, I'm actually pleasantly comforted, even in the Capitol Hill Press Corps, which I think is fair to say is not a right-wing organization. The large majority of reporters in this room made the choice and voted with your faces not to wear the mask. Listen, the crisis here ultimately is about the deliberate chaos and human suffering at the border. When we had the lowest rate of illegal immigration in 45 years under Donald Trump, it wasn't Title 42 that was driving it. It was the Remain in Mexico agreement. It was enforcing the laws. The reason for this chaos is Joe Biden and Kamala Harris made the political decision not to enforce the laws, to release vast numbers of illegal aliens. And with Title 42, they want to release much more. You know, I was looking at one of the...
Title 42 was put in place because of COVID. So if you are against COVID era restrictions...
Look, I'm against an unsecured border. I'm against the chaos. You know, one estimate is that if Title 42 is rescinded permanently, 170,000 more illegal aliens will come through our southern border. That's a massive number. We had 221,303 come across our southern border last month alone. And that's in a month. Yeah, that's not an annual year. That's a month. If Joe Biden follows through with rescinding Title 42, we will see the highest rate of illegal immigration in the history of the United States of America. That is their desired outcome. And on COVID, the utter hypocrisy of it. Look, when you say it's not about public health, let me encourage you, come down to South Texas, visit the hospitals in Laredo that are full, or in McAllen that are full. Visit the schools that are full. Come to the Biden cages. For 4 years, every Democrat and the corporate press talked about kids in cages, kids in cages. How many of y'all have done a story on the Biden cages? What you didn't report on is Barack Obama built those cages. The cages are more full today under Joe Biden than they ever have been. And the last time we went there with 19 senators, the rate of COVID positivity in the Biden cages was over 10%. So this is public health as well. But the Biden administration, the only group on planet Earth they don't care about having COVID is illegal immigrants who they want to release into this country.
So you're saying it's not about COVID then? The rollback of Title 42, you're saying it's about immigration?
It's about both.
Because Title 42, as my colleague says, is implemented as a COVID measure.
Yeah, let me take a crack at this also, because as I said earlier, Title 42 is not going to be there into the future. It's a public health order. It shouldn't be. Once we're beyond this COVID period, which is all the more reason we have to put in place sensible policies to deal with this crisis. Title 42 is not the long-term solution. It's not sustainable. We all know that.
For now to address.
It's not convenient. It's the fact that it's all there is. If we don't have it, if we don't have it, there will be. So there are 2 million people who come to the border now every year, based on last year's numbers, which is the highest it's ever been since 1924, when the Border Patrol started keeping statistics. By far the highest ever. If Title 42 is lifted, think about it. Instead of 2 million and 1 million people coming into the country, you have, just by math, now 2 million people coming into the country. And there are a lot more people coming also, as you've seen, all over the world. It's not just Central America. This chart, which is interesting, I think, because it talks about outside of Mexico and the Northern Triangle, the increase coming. It's 150 countries. It's people from not just Latin America, but Asia and Africa and the Middle East. So that is why taking away 42 would be a catastrophe right now. But it's going to have to go away. That's why the administration needs to put in place a policy behind it. This is what these 11 Democrats are saying, to your question. You can't pull 42 without something in the alternative, something to replace it, or else you have total chaos. And that's what we're not seeing. And the proposal to deal with it, we heard about yesterday, again, is more to facilitate the vast increase in numbers rather than to deal with the numbers. And it's not fair. It's not fair to these countries in Central America and Latin America and really around the world who, as we talked, John Hoeven talked about being in Mexico, Central America, and Latin America with him last year, the presidents of these countries, who met with all 4 of them, all said the same thing. You guys are drawing our people north with your policies. Your asylum policy is a magnet. Stop doing that. It causes us problems. We don't want to lose all these people, first of all. But second of all, the migrant caravans and so on coming through, stop it. Change your policies. Put in place sensible policies. That's all we're asking for.
But in terms of sensible policies, are there any immigrants that your party can support at this point? You know what I mean? Like there's,
We're strongly in support of legal immigration. We're strongly in support of legal immigration. Strongly.
How, though? In what policy during this Congress have Republicans done anything to support legal immigration?
Well, we strongly support legal immigration, period. I mean, America is the most generous country in the world in terms of bringing in legal immigrants. We're for that. I think I speak for all my colleagues.
Do you support, for example, in the Competes Act, the provisions to offer, say, the most non-controversial immigrants of all, STEM PhDs, a green card? We're hearing from your colleagues all week that, this is going to be too controversial for this Republican Party. Is the Republican Party at this point just a restrictionist party?
No, I would support that, of course, and I always have. You staple the green card to the diploma. Senator Bozeman's got to go. You want to say something before you leave?
No, I'm good. The only thing I would remind is we have these numbers, but as somebody that used to be the chair of Homeland Security, these numbers indicate people that are caught. It doesn't count the hundreds of thousands of people because the border guard is so tied up doing things that they're not trained to do, taking care of young children, things like that. You've got hundreds of thousands of others that are going across. The other thing I'd remind people is the border is secure on the Mexican side. The cartels don't allow anybody to cross without getting a cut. So it's a tremendous moneymaker for the drug influx that we're so very concerned about that's been talked about earlier.
But Senator, does the increase in apprehensions have anything to do with the increase of appropriations? As a former chair of the Appropriations Committee, as you increase appropriations for the border, wouldn't that result in more apprehensions?
No, I'm all for, plussing up border security. You do that with.
No, because you actually.
When I was chair, we were actually able to do things concerning building the wall, things like that, putting in security measures, all of those kind of things. So you can do this in a number of different ways. The point is it needs to be done.
And remember, the objective of security of the border is to deter people coming illegally. Deterrence works. There's a reason we got to those low numbers. There's a reason the numbers exploded the moment Joe Biden got there. And by the way, apprehension for most of these is a term that's actually not accurate. I would encourage all of you, come down to the border and see what happens, because they come across the border, they look for a Border Patrol agent. They turn themselves in. They're not being caught. The vast majority of them are not trying to run. They're not trying to escape. They come in and they go seek out a Border Patrol agent. The Border Patrol now puts signs. Here's where you get processed. And the reason is because Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, when they get here, they show up and they have a phone number of someone in the United States. They have a place they want to go. And the Biden administration is the last mile of the human trafficking network. And they put them on a bus and put them on a plane and take them to wherever they want to go in the country. And so these are not apprehensions. The objective is to deter people from crossing illegally. We know how to do it, and it's a very simple thing. You enforce the law. What Joe Biden and Kamala Harris won't do is enforce the law.
Let's take two more questions.
Speaking of deterrence, and you had mentioned this earlier about the current immigration system does need to be reformed as far as asylum processing, adjudication.
Yeah.
So would you agree with the DHS on that point, that you guys do need to do something to reform the immigration process? Or do you think that if the administration implemented deterrent policies, that the current immigration system would be enough would work well?
Well, on the report that was issued yesterday that James Langford had, you will see it says something interesting. It says our current immigration policy is broken. And yet there's no proposal to fix it. So absolutely we want to work with them on that. But that's not what they're proposing. With regard to asylum, the only proposal that they've had, and this came out about a month ago, was to put asylum officers on the border to do an initial screen. But when that individual was deemed not to be eligible for asylum because they didn't meet the standard of credible fear, then that person would be able to immediately appeal to an immigration judge. So in effect, it only created another bump in the road. In other words, another time delay, as opposed to the policy that I would support, and Senator Cornyn and Senator Sinema have legislation that goes along these lines, which is to actually provide the funding to provide an immigration adjudication with regard to asylum at the border immediately. And if that person doesn't qualify, and remember 85% roughly of people who go through the system in the end don't qualify, then those people would go back to their country. That would have an immediate deterrent effect.
So you would agree that deterrence wouldn't be the only solution? It would need to be a kind of a double take.
Well, that is deterrence. I mean, it's deterrence because when your neighbor comes back and reports, you know what, they've got a system in place now where you can't go in illegally. You can only go in if you're legal, and you wait in line. And again, we have the most generous system in the world, and we support that. Or you have to really be someone who does have a legitimate fear of persecution in your home country, and therefore you qualify essentially as an asylee or refugee. That would send a huge signal. That's what's going to stop people from coming. And then all the other provisions we talked about here today that add a further deterrent, such as providing the Border Patrol the tools they need with the technology and the fencing and the walls. And you know, when the Biden administration came in on day one, they stopped the construction of the wall. Fine. They also stopped the construction of all the technology that went with the wall. And what my colleagues can tell you who have been down there in the Del Rio sector as an example, since that was talked about, or El Paso, they not only didn't complete the wall, they stopped the technology. In fact, in Del Rio and El Paso, the technology was stopped after about 10% completion. The wall was about 90% complete. Now, even my Democrat colleagues support technology, I'm told. This is sensors and cameras and so on, but they stopped it all. So there's a lot of things you can do, but ultimately, if you don't fix the asylum system, you're going to continue to have people drawn to our border because they know, as Senator Cruz has said, they can walk in. One more question, then we'll be breaking up this, but I'll stick around, as will Senator Cruz, I'm sure, for questions individually.
Actually, off topic. Can I get your reaction to Trevor, the prisoner swap that resulted in Trevor Reed being?
I'm not up to speed on it. If you want to talk about it.
He's a Texas native.
Yeah, no, we're very glad that he has been returned, and He should never have been detained in Russia, and we're glad he's back. We're glad that he's going to be back home in Texas, and we are celebrating that.
Take one more question. Since that wasn't on. Yeah. Go ahead.
Can I ask about expedited removal?
I'm sorry, say it again? Expedited removal?
On expedited removal,
Yeah.
one of the pieces in the DHS memo was to increase use of expedited removal with the thought that a formal deportation order is going to be more of a deterrent, as you mentioned, to repeat crossers who right now don't face a legal consequence. There's no disincentive to just keep trying. And if you look at the chart even, you sort of start to see a small rise starting in April 2020 when Title 42 is imposed. I was just wondering what your response was to the recidivism concerns about Title 42 and whether you would support expanding expedited removal, or do you just see that as processing people faster?
Yeah, I think expedited removal has to be part of any policy that works. Under the Obama administration, there was about, as you know, there were more people who were deported through expedited removal. Roughly 65% of those who came in illegally were removed. The numbers we have for the Biden administration, which would be last fiscal year, the 8 months of the Biden administration, it's roughly 4%. So there's a huge difference even between the Obama years and the Biden years in terms of using expedited removal and actually deporting people who did not qualify to be in the United States. And it's a further example of what we're talking about. There's been a deliberate attempt through policy to change what we're doing at the border and also with regard to the interior, with regard to expedited removal and deportations. And this is part of the magnet.
So Title 42 were rescinded, and in its place was a very robust expedited removal system where a high percentage of people were removed through that process. So there is somewhat of a process, but it's...
Well, yeah, again, the one caveat here, which is a huge one, is that if you come to the border and you claim asylum, you are permitted to come in. If you pass credible fear. But that's a very low bar, as you know, at the border, extremely low bar. So, and then you go through the process. And then at the end of the process, roughly 15% are deemed to have qualified. But meanwhile, all these other folks are in the country. And so you have to deal with that issue as well, not just expedited removal. And then when that happens, is the person deported or not? Right now, again, the 5% figure, that is not happening. So it's a big change in terms of even the Obama years until this administration, much less from the Trump administration to now. Any comments on that?
Can I ask quickly, you care deeply about the border, you also care deeply about Ukraine, and we're expecting a supplemental request.
Yeah.
Do you see that as an opportunity